Hello, everyone. We are back with another webinar tonight with Tero Parviainen, I think, if I mentioned right. And we are going to cover hot loading and time travel, which is kind of magic, like some kind of black magic going on. But before we go into the topic, I want to introduce Wasim. Hello, Wasim.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Very good, very good.
Nice.
So, oh wow, I like your T-shirt. What is that?
This is Apollo, man.
Ah, okay. No, I know. I know Apollo. Okay. So, Tero.
Yeah.
Your turn. So it's all to you. So maybe you can do a little intro of yourself. That would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Tero. I'm a front-end developer based in Helsinki, doing a lot of Angular and React and all kinds of things lately. And so I basically work making applications for all kinds of customers. So I'm kind of practicing application developer.
Cool.
And as part of that, I do a bunch of writing around what I do. I've written a couple of books, one of them on Angular 1 called Build Your Own Angular, and then a bunch of articles and things like that.
Yeah, I've been following.
And so that's what I do.
Your articles, very nice articles around the web. What's this? The web audio API, isn't it?
Oh, sorry.
The web audio API.
Oh, right. Yeah, audio. Yeah, I've been playing with that a lot recently, and actually, what I'm going to show today touches on that a little bit. Okay. So yeah, I like to play with web technologies, and lately some of it's been music related and sound related. So
yeah, we all remember your demo from ngconf.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of one of the big ones.
Blew my mind, actually.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, mine too, because I had no idea what was going to happen in that talk, but
it went very well.
It went much better than I expected, and I was happy about that.
Cool.
But yeah, so lately I've kind of been trying to figure out how to kind of get some of these developer productivity related benefits that they have, for example, in React land with Redux, working with Angular. And those are really the topic of tonight, which are hot loading and time travel, which are both kind of similar, different but related issues related to how we can improve our effectiveness while we are developing by managing carefully the state of our applications while we are doing that development. And these really come from well, they were popularized in JavaScript, both of these concepts with Redux and by Dan Abramov when he came out with his React hot loader and the related technologies around that. But we certainly can use some of these in Angular as well. If we manage our state in a certain way, which is essentially by using ngrx store or Redux. And the key idea with that is that if we put our state of our application in one place, into one central location, and we carefully manage changes in that state, then we have this kind of thing we can hold on to, and we can, for example, keep that while we reload the application and then put it back to the next version of the application, which is effectively gets us things like hot loading, which has the practical benefit that while I'm coding and I want to make a code change, and I've done kind of many different things in the application UI, and I do the code change, I can apply those code changes without losing all my UI state, which is what usually happens.
Yeah, it makes the debugging experience much nicer.
Exactly. So I've been kind of trying to get this to work in Angular, and many other people have been doing that as well. It's all kind of still very new. So when I'm going to do some live coding soon, there's also an element of excitement there because things keep changing and it's a little bit rough around the edges, but it does work, and that's what I would hope to show today. And also what I'd like to show is that it's not really magical, that there is kind of a certain way we can do things, and I hope after this session people will kind of know how all that works, and it kind of loses the magic, which is always good when we're talking about
Yeah.
developer tools.
We trust you, Tero.
Great, thank you for the vote of confidence. So what I'm really going to do is play with this little Angular application that I have here. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay.
Right now. So you should be seeing my screen now, hopefully.
Yes.
Great. So I have this little Angular app that I've been working on, which is essentially for playing with additive sound synthesis, which is the concept of adding together different sine waves to make new waves, because there's a theory that you can synthesize any sound in the world just by putting sine waves together. And so I have here this kind of 12 or 13 different sine waves, what is called a harmonic series, that have different frequencies, and I can control their amplitudes individually, and then I can get this full, this added up sum of these waves here. So I can play with this and make different wave shapes. And I can look at that, and I can also listen to it.
Okay.
So I have a little web audio API here. Don't know if that sound comes through to you, because I don't understand computers, but
it's not coming.
It's not coming. So, well, that's not essential for our discussion, luckily. And anyone can play with this. I'll send the URL out later. But it's more important to be able to see things. So this is a pretty basic Angular application that I have in here. There is just one thing about it that's kind of notable from our perspective today, which is that this uses the ngrx pattern to manage the state. And that has a couple of implications, which are that if we look at the UI components of this application, we'll see that they generally don't do very much. They have these inputs and outputs that manage what data goes into them and what events go out of them, but in addition to that, there's not much in them. So there's not really that much state in these components, because that all comes from these inputs. And there's not much logic in these applications, because whenever something happens, we send out these events to somewhere else. And instead, where all of that state is held is in this place called the ngrx store, which has this single data structure where everything comes from. And also, when things happen, those are done at the ngrx store by this little function I have in here called the reducer. So this is where all the events go, or all the actions go, that when something happens in the world, for example, when I start or stop the sound, when I control some of these sine waves here, they all come in as actions to this store, and then the store will get a new state based on that. So anyone who's familiar with Redux, that's exactly what I'm doing here. This is using the ngrx store library, but it's exactly the Redux pattern.
Yeah.
But the main thing about this is that the state is really not in the UI, it's in a different place, which is inside the store. Because that is important for gaining the hot loading capabilities that we want here. And so the hot loading problem, or the problem that hot loading solves, is this issue that when I've constructed the most beautiful sound in the world, which I obviously have done here right now, and then I want to change something about that code. So I say I want to change the color of this canvas curves here to blue. What happens is that Webpack picks that up, it reloads the application, and while doing that, it blows my state away because it reloads the page. So this is what usually happens when we develop, right? When we don't have hot loading.
Oh no, you lost the perfect sound.
Panic.
Exactly, and I will never get it back again because I can't remember what it was. So this is kind of the usual experience. It isn't that bad because it happens kind of quickly, and Webpack can load those changes up. It takes a couple of seconds, but we do lose the state. And that's, in this application, I lose the curve, but in other applications, you might lose your whatever you had navigated to, or clicked some buttons, or filled out some form fields. Those are all going to go away, unless they're persistent somehow, but usually they're not. So that's kind of what I want to solve here. And so this application doesn't have hot loading at the moment, but what I would actually like to do is just add that in right now. And it does take a few manual steps to do that because these libraries aren't quite as mature yet. But the benefit of doing that right now is it'll actually show you how that all works. And we'll also learn a few things about how Angular bootstrapping occurs and how the Angular application lifecycle works as we do that. And it will hopefully kind of demystify what hot loading means.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so I'm just gonna get going with that then. And the first thing I'll do is I'll enable the Webpack hot module replacement feature. So the Webpack development server, which I'm using here to run this locally, has the ability to kind of code changes occur in these code modules and potentially to kind of replace them on the fly. We just need to enable that feature by using the hot flag here as we start the Webpack dev server. So that's kind of one prerequisite for this whole thing. So I'm adding this flag here, and then I'll just go and restart my Webpack dev server here on the command line to get it running in the hot mode. And we can also see that in the browser now, as it starts, it'll log here that hot module replacement has been enabled. So that's going now. But that by itself doesn't really do much yet, because while Webpack knows how to load code, it doesn't know what to do with that, right? It doesn't know how to replace a module in our Angular application because it doesn't understand anything about Angular or anything else.
Right.
It's just a piece of infrastructure that we can use to build our own hot loading on top of. So that's what we are going to do next. And I'm going to then go into the main development entry point of this application, which is where we do our Angular Bootstrap invocation. So this is where the Angular application actually starts. We call the Bootstrap module. And I'm going to change that so that we are potentially going to do it in one of two ways, hot or cold. And to get that going, I'm going to first wrap this whole thing into a function called Bootstrap. And then I'm going to check here whether this current module is hot, which is something that Webpack will put in there while Hmr is enabled. So it will put to this node or this ES6 module this hot flag when we are running in hot mode. And that allows us to make a decision about which kind of bootstrap we're going to do.
Okay.
So if it's not hot, we're going to do what we were doing earlier, which is just to call bootstrap. And that's going to be kind of the regular loading when this feature is not enabled. But then in the hot case, we'll do something else. And I'll actually make another function here, which I'll introduce in a moment, which will handle this. So it takes this current module and it takes this bootstrap function as arguments. And to host this new function, I'll actually make another file here in this application called Hmr TS. So here we'll introduce that function. It takes a module, and then it takes the bootstrap function, which is whatever, which is this function here. So it takes no argument and returns whatever Angular's bootstrap returns, which is going to be a promise to an ng module reference. So this is just a function signature of Angular's bootstrap.
Okay.
So here I'm now prepared to do whatever needs to be done for a hot load. And the first thing to do with that is we'll actually tell Webpack that we are prepared to handle hot loading for this module that we have here. So we can say accept, which means that it signals to Webpack that we are going to handle the loading for this module, and it doesn't need to do the full page reload. And so what we can do here is we can actually just call bootstrap now, which is going to start the Angular application. And what the effect of this will be that if I actually go in here, well, actually I need to still go and pull this hot bootstrap into this main file here.
Oops.
Right. So let's see what happens. reload once to make sure we have all the latest stuff in here. And I'll just go and make another one of these code changes, or of the curves again. And it's Webpack is doing the recompilation with TypeScript now, and then it actually changes on the fly. So now the page did not reload.
Nice.
So that's pretty good. It's much faster now, but there are some issues which can be a bit tricky at this point, because there's something that you cannot see from this, which is that there are actually now 2 Angular applications running on the page. Because we loaded a new one in here, we bootstrapped another one, but we didn't do anything about that previous one. And that is not evident from what we can see, but it can be a real problem, because every time you load your code, you're going to start another Angular application, and eventually you're going to have 100 of them running. And so we're going to have to do some cleanup here for the old Angular application before we start the new one. And that we can do by adding a hook here to Webpack, which it will call whenever it disposes the module. So there's this callback we can introduce, which Webpack will always call when it's doing a hot load before it gets rid of the old application of version. And here we should do whatever we need to do to get rid of an Angular application. And I actually did not know how to do that before I did this hot loading thing, but there is a way to actually destroy an Angular application, which we can do by grabbing a reference to the ng module that when we bootstrap. So I'm going to make a variable for that. And then this bootstrap returned a promise, so I'll just add a promise handler there. And then grab the module that it gives, the module reference it gives me. From the promise handler. So what this means is that when I've done a bootstrap, I'll have this ng module variable populated with the running module. And it has a function on it called destroy, which actually fully destroys that module, destroys the application, takes it away from the page. And that should do what we need.
Awesome.
So if I try that, let's see. I'm gonna again change some colors here. Then it'll recompile and throw a huge exception here, which is interesting. And so this is another thing we need to handle. So what happens when you destroy an Angular application? It actually takes the host element with it from the page. So when you have your index.html, you have your root kind of component tag in there, which is where the Angular will bootstrap. When you destroy that app, it will actually remove it from the DOM, which means that when the next version of the application loads, there's nothing on the page for it to kind of latch onto. So that's a problem with kind of these dynamic life cycles, is that it actually takes it away from the page and it isn't here anymore. So like in the index.html, I have this HS app tag, but when I destroy the app, it goes away. And here's where we can get some libraries to help us. So RxJS has written this Angular Hmr library, which I can add to the project, which I think was Angular class Hmr, if I recall correctly, because that has some helper functions we can use to deal with these kinds of issues that come up when we implement hot loading. So I added that package into my package JSON here. And I can then pull it into my Hmr module, because it has this function called, I think, create new hosts. Provides, which kind of handles this DOM stuff. So what I'll need to do at this dispose here is I'll need a reference to the Angular application, which is an application reference as opposed to the module. And I'll get that from the injector of this module. Here I'm calling the root injector of this ng module to get a reference to the application that it's running. because that application then has references to all the components that are currently on the screen, or all the root components that are in there. It has this list of components inside it. And what I can get from those is all the host elements, native DOM elements that those components are mounted onto. Get an array of those, and that's then something I could give to the Angular HMR create new hosts function. What it will do is do whatever DOM cloning needs to be done to kind of make those new elements on the page. And there's this little additional trick here that we need to apply, which is that it's going to make them as invisible hidden elements at first, so that we don't have two applications on the screen at the same time, but it's going to return a function that we can make them visible after we have destroyed the previous application. So that we need to do this in 2 steps. So this is where it will clone the DOM and make it hidden. This is where Angular is destroying the old application, destroying the DOM, and this is where we make the new DOM visible. So there are some steps involved here, but it should then do what we need it to do. So let's see what happens. So now
before you do a change, can you do some more changes on the waves so we have a more complex state?
Sure. Yeah.
Just to get back to the initial issue.
Right. Yeah, I'll do those here. So now I've done them, and then I'll just go. I can't decide on a good color, which was not green,
yellow.
so yellow. Okay, so we reloaded, but we did lose the state.
I see.
So now we have solved the problem of actually doing an Angular application reload, but we've done nothing with the state yet. And that's the final step. And now we have to pull in the ngrx store into this picture. So we're also going to do what I described earlier, which is to kind of take that state from inside the store before we destroy the application, so that we can plug it into the next version of the application. And that's what really will make this reloading hot, as opposed to just regular in-place loading what we have now.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is import the store class from ngrx store. And then I'll also take that from the injector here for as we are destroying the application.
Yeah.
Get store. And we can get the state from that. So that the store is going to be an RxJS observable. So we can actually use the take operator to take just one latest state from that, and subscribe to that, which will give us the current state, and we'll put it inside this state variable. So this is just RxJS code for
just getting the latest
state, and it will call it synchronously, so it will be populated after this line has executed. Now we have the state, and the final piece of the puzzle is to plug that back into the next version of the application. So I'll take this variable and I'll actually pull it to the top level of this module here, and I'll also export it so it will be available outside. So whenever this dispose has run, that variable will hold the state that was in the application that was just destroyed. And then I'll go to my main application module where I set up the store, the ngrx store here, and I'll import that state from my HMR module. HMR. And I'll plug it in as the second argument.
Oh, as a default state, the initial state, yeah.
The initial state, exactly. And this should do it then. So let's see. So it's now getting this change that I just did. And let's again build some more complex sine waves here.
Cool.
And then change the color once again. So let's try back. And now we have preserved the state.
Boom.
So this is effectively how hot loading works. It has some kind of manual steps you need to do, which are probably not something you would want to do in most applications, but it's just like this at the moment because the libraries around this aren't like they're changing so fast that there's not like a combination of libraries you can just install to do this. So, but kind of optimally, you would npm install some library that does whatever is in this file right now, right? So you wouldn't have to write this code. But the benefit of writing that code is you learn how this whole thing works.
So, we have a question from the YouTube guys.
Okay.
What token did you pass to the injector to get the application ref?
So I used the class for the application ref. So this is the same that I would use when I injected application ref to some component. The token is the class as it is for the store as well.
Right.
Yeah, this is the same as if you were using the constructor.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just a way to actually look up dependencies from the injector instead of injecting them. But yeah, these are the tokens, and in these cases, they are the class itself.
By the way, there's another question about the stores.
Yeah.
So Greg asked, how do you synchronize between the ngrx store and the backend data in order to maintain the front-end immutability? Like, there is a way to sync up both backend and store?
Usually not so. So when we talk about stores, we are usually only holding like UI state or app front-end state in those stores, and the backends are something that don't really are kind of remote to the whole thing. That's usually how I've done them. I don't know if you guys have some different experiences, but definitely for something like hot loading, I usually don't think of the backend, and I don't need to think of the backend because this only has to do with,
let's say, like outside of hot reloading or replacement. Like
just in general.
Yeah, in general with Redux and ngrx. Like, is it feasible? Is it a good practice?
Feasible to sync the state.
Yeah, backend with a front-end state.
I think that's a highly kind of dependent on the architecture of the application and what the backend actually is and how the whole thing works. So the way I've done this is that well, there isn't actually that much special in how I do it as opposed to I would do it without Redux, which is that I consider the backend or the backend APIs as a remote service that it's my responsibility to make sure my app is in sync with them, and whether I do it with Redux or with something else, I still have to do it somehow. So none of these libraries do anything for me in terms of that. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly, though.
I think it will work similar to what you just did. So you just set up some default state, and you just need to make sure that the default state is the one coming from the server.
Yep.
And that's the way you
with
the store. You can set up some value there.
Sure, yeah. You can load a state data structure and just put it in here. That's not what I usually do, though. I usually let the application load its own state using kind of loading tasks and actions that actually construct the state from server calls, rather than having that state data structure be known anywhere else than the actual front-end application. So it's kind of very much the state.
Another way would be to create a specific action to just make sure that you get the latest. That's another option.
Yeah. There are many ways to skin this cat, but But most often I just consider the state as an internal concern of my front-end app, and the fact that it has a store or uses Redux is not really something that architecturally anything else in my system knows about, except for that Angular application or that React application.
So could you save the state into a local storage?
Sure. You can do that too. Well, actually, let's also jump into the time travel stuff a little bit, because it kind of relates to this. Okay, so let me just actually switch branches. So the thing about that state is that it is just a single data structure, and it usually is just spinning up and getting to my master branch, where I know I have a functional version of this whole thing. It's just data, arrays, and objects, and you can do anything with that you can do with JSON, for example. You can send it over the network, you can put it on disk like local storage, and you can look at it as just a piece of data. And that gives a lot of flexibility in what you can do with that. For example, in addition to saving the local storage, you can, in bug reports that you send to an exception reporting system, you can include that state. And then you can reproduce the application state in your local development environment that happened in some user in production that was having a problem, which is really useful.
That's really powerful.
It's very powerful, yeah. And the other thing you can do with that is play with the fabric of time, which is a fancy way of saying that. We can use developer tools like the Redox Dev Tools extension, which I have installed in my Firefox here, which I can open up and try to mount on my screen here, which adds a lot more visibility and control over that ngrx store state that we were just talking about that was in that state variable. So for example, this application state is visualized by this extension as a tree. So this is the variable that we were playing with earlier that we had to kind of retain during the hot load, and here we see what's inside it. There's a couple of attributes inside that object which represent these wave partials here.
Nice.
And I can look at all of that in here as a graph, and that would work for any application in the same way. It visualizes your state. And what we can also do is we can see what all the actions have been that have kind of gone through this. So when this application loads, it does a bunch of these changes of these values, and when I change these here, we'll also see them in the log here, that there was an action that changed partial 2 to this and this amplitude. And furthermore, when I do a bunch of these, I can use then this time slider to actually go back in time to states that happened before that those actions were.
I think you need to extend a little bit the window because it's partially covered. Okay.
Yeah, let's see if this works or not. The thing about these extensions is that they seem to change very often, and I, for example, couldn't get this to work on Chrome yesterday, so I'm using Firefox now. And as you see, it's a little bit, let's say, surprising in how it works sometimes, because there seems to be some instability between these versions. So here we can see some of these changes. Obviously, it would have to be a lot more stable to be actually something I would use every day. But these ideas kind of are communicated here, which is that it will jump into old states that I had in the state variable. And then going forward, I can replay those actions I did before to change that state.
Yeah.
And so this is called the Redox Dev Tools extension. It's designed for Redux, but because ngrx and Redux are so similar, they can actually use a lot of the same developer tool infrastructure, including this extension. Though it seems that the version I have here right now is not working perfectly.
Okay.
But
It's still experimental.
It's very experimental, and I saw their GitHub issues. They actually made some changes, I think, yesterday, because both ngrx store DevTools and this extension are effectively being worked on every day right now, and they get out of sync often. So to use this in actual kind of production work, I'll have to wait a little bit. But the promise is that we can, for example, do things like fill out a form in your application and find out it doesn't work, fix a bug in the code, and then replay the same actions that filled out the form to see if it works now without having to manually kind of run those actions again and again.
Yeah, that's really good.
Because all this control we have here. But obviously, the hot loading is really the more important, at least to my workflow. That's what I do all the time when I change code. Before I even think of firing up any kind of developer tool extensions like this one. This is something I would reach into maybe a couple of times a day or something. But hot loading is something I use every minute.
True.
So that though they are related things, they are not as important, at least to my workflow. And definitely because this extension and its integration with ngrx Dev Tools is still so experimental, you can't really rely on it to work all the time, as we can see here.
Yeah,
but it's getting there. And
but it's looking promising.
It's looking promising, yeah. Yeah, and the stuff that they have in here, such as visualizing your state, is really, really
that's cool.
Impressive and also just useful in having this whole new way of looking at what's going on in your application that's not visible from your UI, nor from the DOM or from the console log. This is something that's usually you cannot see in most applications.
Tero, can you show us again how did you inject the initial state, please? Initial
state, yeah. Which is actually my least favorite part of this whole thing because it's not not that great. So ngrx store has this module that we use to initialize it, which takes usually one argument, which is your reducer function, but it has an optional second argument, which is the initial state that we will use to seed the store. And what I'm doing here is that is in hot loading mode when this will actually load not the initial version of the application, but a new version that replaces some old version. This variable will have that state from the old version in it, and I will plug that in here. And the reason I'm not a big fan of this is that I have this whole other thing apart from this Hmr namespace that I need to handle in my main application module. Yeah. And that has another practical problem, is that I'm pretty sure this will not work with AOT compilation because it has to understand this whole thing statically. And that is why this is something that I hope will be fixed in the libraries, which will actually would be a great way for anyone who's listening to maybe contribute to this whole idea, because let's see if I can find the right project.
Sure.
There's an open issue in the library called ngrx store Hmr, which essentially
maybe
implements this.
It's AOT, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's maybe related to this ahead of time compilation, or
it might be related to that, but it maybe has some other related issues as well. But it's a library that implements this pattern that I actually implemented manually earlier today. But it doesn't quite work with the latest API of ngrx store and everything. So there's this issue here where this under discussion how we should actually do this in a way that's clean and works with AOT and works with all the latest stuff. And this is why I had to do this manual coding earlier.
Okay.
Which will be replaced by a library. But the kind of problems to solve there is how to actually inject this initial state in here that doesn't require us to do it in here inside the actual ng module decorator. Because this is going to be a problem for AOT compilation at least. And also it's not just, doesn't feel like a clean way to do it. To put it here.
You could create also a specific action that could be run at any time.
Definitely, yeah. You can on an application level solve it that way.
Yeah.
What would solve it probably is for ngrx store that library itself to add an API for injecting the initial state.
Yeah, to understand this. Yeah.
Exactly, because then we have the RxJS library, Angular class HMR, has this other feature in it, which is pretty neat, which is that it gives your ng module these lifecycle hooks, HMR on init and on this joy. And if we were able to, that's pretty cool. Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
But if we could only put the state into the store in here, then it would be perfect. But we have to do it in here as we actually make the module.
I'm sure Patrick will fix that tonight, maybe.
Yeah. This will be probably a collaboration between Patrick and Rob, because I think Rob is behind this ngrx store library, mostly.
True.
But also, if anyone has any ideas how to kind of do this issue is what we should be looking at to kind of get this thing to a place where we don't have to do quite this much manually.
Yeah, this manual work.
Yeah, it isn't that bad. I've done it in my applications, and I'm not really sad about having to do it, because it's just something I have to do once. But I wouldn't kind of want everyone to have to do that same thing.
Yeah, it's only this plug of the state, plugging this state.
Yeah,
looking a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that doesn't quite fit together, and these aren't problems these are problems that can be easily solved. We just kind of have to do it.
Well, looks very promising anyway.
Yeah, it's useful to me every day, though there are some of these kind of things that make it a bit rough around the edges still, because it's new in Angular land. But the main message for me today is, you can do it today if you want to have this. You just need to do a little bit extra work to get it going.
Yeah, very good.
So maybe if we all collaborate, we can come up with a library.
Definitely, yeah. And we don't even need a new library. We need to just make these existing ones kind of fit together, plug together nicely.
Yeah, it needs some final polishing, but it's 99% done. So.
Yep.
Exactly.
Cool.
Always the neat thing about kind of playing with these things when they're not quite finished, which is what I showed earlier, is that as you go through that process, you end up picking up things about how Angular bootstraps and how it gets destroyed and how you can do these things. All these things are that I didn't know about Angular before I actually went through that process of figuring out how to do the hot loading. So kind of digging into these kinds of details teaches you a lot about how these frameworks work, which is always useful in all kinds of situations.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm not sure. I think you are done. You're almost.
I'm done. Yeah.
Packing, in a way to say. So I'd like to thank you. For showing us, sharing this.
Awesome stuff.
Prototype. It's really cool, and also showing little bits of Angular that are not so known.
Right.
This is very, very cool. Very cool. So thank you for joining us today. I don't know if there are cool. There are any questions remaining, Wasim, or
let me check. Well, there is this question about NGRX.
Mm-hmm.
Would you recommend NGRX for ERP applications, enterprise operation planning applications?
Yeah, maybe. The thing about things like ERPs is that they tend to be very form heavy and very kind of data input heavy. And that's kind of the one place where I haven't seen things like Redux being as useful as they often are, because when you have a bunch of forms and a bunch of form inputs, usually you just want to have immutable objects that you can just bind your data into.
Yeah.
That's my experience, at least. So I would use, for something like an ERP system, I would probably use ngrx or Redux for the kind of orchestration of the high-level logic of the application, routes, and moving between application screens and moving between states. But the actual kind of detailed things like in ERPs, you would fill in like customer information and these kinds of things. Those is where I would probably drop into not using ngrx and using just regular forms and regular mutable state and services without ngrx. So I wouldn't use it for everything in an ERP.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because otherwise it could get like really big piece of a state.
Yeah, there are kind of places where these tools are more appropriate than others, and lots of forms. That's not what Redux or ngrx is optimized for, really.
Okay, so you want to wrap up, Wasim?
What should I say?
Say goodbye or something.
I was glad, yeah, we have Tero today, so I need to have some time and like test all the stuff he showed us today.
Yeah, true. There are some low-level APIs that he shown. That yeah, I also want to check it out. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Could you share later all the links to what you showed us, like the DevTool, the
Definitely. So should I just send them to you guys and you can share them with?
Yeah. We can also share it. We can also share it on the YouTube page, because that will be for the future viewers. But we can also share it on Meetup. I think a YouTube page would be better.
Okay.
And then I can copy and paste it to Meetup.
Cool. So let's do that.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you again, and hope to see you soon.
See you soon. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Ciao.